My grandmother left me everything when she died, but the next morning, my mother walked into the room with empty eyes and said that none of it was mine anymore, that it now belonged to my stepfather. In that instant, as the morning sun crossed through the window and illuminated her face with a light that seemed to expose all the lies, I realized that the inheritance my grandmother left me wasn't just money, land, or memories. It was the weight of a truth that nobody wanted me to discover. It was the story of a silent betrayal, built with years of manipulation, fear, and choices that destroy entire families. And I was at the center of it all, without understanding how I had gotten there. Before I continue, I need to ask you something. If you've ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet, if you've ever been betrayed by someone who should have protected you, if you've ever lost something that was rightfully yours and nobody believed you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I want more people to know that they're not alone in this pain, that the injustice that comes from within our own family isn't our fault, and that deep down, we always find a way to rise again, even when it seems impossible. Stay with me until the end, because this story will show you that sometimes the greatest proof of love is when we learn to choose ourselves, even when the whole world seems to be against us. I grew up in Daegu, in the countryside of South Korea. It's a small city, where everyone knows everyone, where the streets still have that smell of food being prepared in homes, where time seems to pass more slowly. The mornings there had a specific smell: freshly cooked rice, burning firewood, the steam rising from the pots while my grandmother prepared breakfast before the sun fully rose. She woke up early, always. She said that the day only truly began when we gave thanks for being alive. I would wake up to the sound of her moving around in the kitchen, the creaking of the wooden floorboards, the low singing of an old song that she never finished. It was a song about a woman who waited for her husband to return from war. He never came back, but she kept singing, because the music was the only thing that kept her alive. My grandmother said that all the women in our family had a song like that, a melody they carried inside their chest that helped them survive the most difficult days, and that one day I would find mine. My grandmother raised me, not because my mother wasn't present, she was, but she was distant, always busy with something I never quite understood. She worked at a textile factory in the city, leaving before dawn and returning late at night, with tired eyes and hands stained with dye. She barely spoke to me. When she did, it was to give quick orders: eat, sleep, don't bother me. It was as if I were an obligation, not a daughter. And over time, I learned not to expect anything from her. I learned to find comfort in my grandmother's arms, in her soft voice, in the way she braided my hair with infinite patience. My grandmother was the one who taught me everything: how to plant flowers in the small field behind the house, how to cook rice to perfection, how to fold clothes in a way that they wouldn't wrinkle. But she also taught me bigger things: how to look people in the eyes when speaking to them, how not to lower my head when someone tried to diminish me, how to understand that silence sometimes says more than 1,000 words. She had firm hands, marked by time and work. Each wrinkle, each callus, each scar told a story. Stories of wars, of hunger, of losing everything and starting over from scratch. Stories of strong women who had no choice but to survive. One day, what is fair will find you, she used to say, with that calm smile that seemed to know things I still didn't understand. No matter how long it takes, justice always arrives. It may not be in the time we want, but it arrives. I believed her. I believed every word, every silent promise she made with her gaze. Because my grandmother was the only person in the world who made me feel that I mattered, that my existence had value, that I wasn't a burden or a mistake. She looked at me as if I were the most precious thing in the universe, and perhaps to her, I was. I remember an afternoon when we were in the flower field. I was about 10 years old, and I was helping her pull out the weeds that grew among the tulips. The sun was hot, but there was a light breeze that brought the smell of wet earth and petals. My grandmother suddenly stopped, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, and looked at me with a seriousness that frightened me. "Minji," she said, using my full name. "You need to promise me something." I stopped too, holding the small wooden rake she had made for me. "What, Grandma?" "Promise me that you will never let anyone make you believe that you're not enough. Nobody, understand? Not a man, not a woman, not family. You were born complete, and nothing that anyone says or does can change that." I didn't fully understand at the time. I didn't understand why she seemed so worried, why her voice trembled a little, why her eyes became bright as if she were holding back tears. But I promised, because it was what she wanted, and I would do anything to make her happy. Years later, when everything collapsed, I remembered that promise, and I understood why she had made me swear it. When I was 16 years old, my mother met my stepfather. He appeared suddenly, like a shadow that crawls along the wall. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders and an easy smile. He spoke with that confidence that some people confuse with security, but which is actually just disguised arrogance. He worked as a used car salesman in the city, and had that way about him of someone who was always trying to convince you of something, even when he wasn't selling anything. My mother changed when she met him. She started smiling more, dressing up, wearing perfume. For the first time in her life, I saw her excited about something, and part of me was happy for her, because despite all the distance between us, she was still my mother, and I wanted her to be happy. But my grandmother didn't like him from the start. She didn't say anything directly, but I noticed. I noticed in the way she became tense when he showed up at the house, in the way she watched him with that penetrating gaze, as if she were reading his soul and not liking what she saw. One night, after he left, I found my grandmother sitting alone in the kitchen, with a cup of cold tea in her hands. "Grandma, are you okay?" I asked, sitting next to her. She took a while to respond. She kept looking at the cup, as if the answers were in there. "That man is not what he appears to be," she finally said, in a low voice. "He smiles too much, and when someone smiles too much, it's usually because they're hiding something. But Mom likes him. Your mother is tired of being alone, and tired people make mistakes, big mistakes." I didn't understand at the time. I thought my grandmother was being unfair, that she was judging him without giving him a chance. But she knew. She always knew. They got married 6 months later. It was a small ceremony, in a rented hall in the city. My grandmother didn't go. She said her legs hurt, that she couldn't make the trip. But I knew it was a lie. She simply didn't want to be there, didn't want to pretend that she approved of that union. In the first months, he was kind. He brought gifts, made jokes, tried to win everyone's trust. But gradually, the mask began to fall. He started controlling my mother's money, deciding where she could go and who she could talk to. He started making comments about my grandmother, saying she was old-fashioned, that she lived in an old house that wasn't worth anything, that she was holding my mother back to the past. And my mother, tired and in love, started believing him. I saw it all happen. I saw my mother distance herself more and more from her own mother. I saw her stop visiting the house, stop calling, stop caring. And I saw my grandmother suffer in silence, with that painful dignity of someone who knows they can't force anyone to stay. But none of this prepared me for what would come next. When my grandmother died, it was sudden. She was 78 years old, but she was strong. She still took care of the field, still cooked, still sang that song in the morning. One day she simply didn't wake up. It was peaceful, they said. She fell asleep and didn't come back. I would like to believe that. I would like to believe that she left in peace. But I will always wonder if, deep down, she died of a broken heart, from seeing her daughter drift away, from knowing that the family she had built was crumbling. I didn't cry at the funeral. I stood next to the coffin, listening to the wind pass through the cemetery trees, trying to understand why the silence seemed heavier than the grief itself. People cried around me, whispered condolences that didn't ease anything, touched my shoulder with that pity that hurts more than it consoles. My mother was there, with a pale face and dry eyes, my stepfather beside her, holding her arm as if he owned her. But I couldn't cry. Maybe because I still didn't believe she was gone, or maybe because, deep down, I already knew that the worst was still to come. The lawyer appeared the day after the funeral. He was a thin man, with round glasses and a solemn expression. He gathered the family in the living room of my grandmother's house and read the will out loud. Each word echoed in the silent environment, loaded with weight and meaning. And then, he said what my grandmother had left, everything to me. The house, the flower field, the savings, the furniture, the clothes, the jade ring, everything. My mother turned pale, my stepfather turned red, and I was paralyzed, not knowing how to react. "This can't be right," my mother said, her voice trembling. She can't have done this. I'm her daughter. I should inherit." The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked at her with a neutral expression. "The will is clear. Your mother left everything to her granddaughter. It's registered with witnesses and notarized signatures. There's no room for contestation." "But she was old," my stepfather shouted, getting up from his chair. "She was confused. She didn't know what she was doing. There are medical reports proving that she was in full mental capacity when she wrote the will, the lawyer responded, without getting flustered. She made sure everything was legal. That's when my stepfather looked at me, and in that look, I saw everything. Hatred, greed, contempt. You convinced her to do this, didn't you? He said, pointing his finger at me. You manipulated a sick old woman. I didn't do anything, I replied, feeling the tears finally rising. I didn't even know she had made a will. Liar. You were always her favorite. She always treated you better than she treated her own daughter. My mother said nothing. She just lowered her head, as if she were ashamed, and that hurt more than any scream. The lawyer left shortly after, leaving the papers on the table, and then the war began. The next morning, my mother appeared, and she wasn't alone. My stepfather was beside her, with that fake smile he always used when he wanted something. My mother entered the house without knocking, as if she still owned the place, as if her own mother's death meant nothing more than an opportunity. She looked around, evaluating each piece of furniture, each object, each piece of history that my grandmother had built. And then, with a coldness I had never seen in her before, she said the words that would change everything. This now belongs to him. I blinked, trying to process what she had said. What? The house, the field, everything. Your grandmother was confused at the end of her life. She didn't know what she was doing when she wrote that will. But now, this belongs to your stepfather. It's only fair. He took care of her in her last years. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. He never took care of her. He barely showed up here. He helped with money. That's a lie. Grandma never accepted anything from him. My mother raised her voice, something rare coming from her. You don't understand anything, Minji. You're just a child. You don't know how the world works. I know this is theft, I shouted back, feeling the tears fall. I know you're trying to take from me what is rightfully mine. It was as if she had pulled the ground out from under me, as if the air had left my lungs all at once. I looked at her, searching for some sign of regret, of doubt, of humanity. But all I saw was a woman I no longer recognized, a woman who had chosen a man over her own daughter, a woman who was willing to rewrite history, to erase her own mother's last wishes, just to please someone who deserved nothing. She left everything to me, I said, my voice trembling. It's in the will. I saw it. Wills can be contested, she responded, without even looking me in the eyes. And they will be. You can't prove she was in her right mind. She was old. She was sick. Any judge will understand. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't about justice. It wasn't about what was right. It was about power. And my mother had chosen his side. But what she didn't know was that wouldn't be the last word. Have you ever felt the world take from you something that was rightfully yours? If you have, tell me in the comments. Because injustice hurts more when it comes from within your own family. When the person who should protect you is the same one who stabs you in the back. In the following days, everything changed. My stepfather began renovating the house. He hired workers, bought new paint, replaced the old furniture with modern, soulless things. He tore down the curtains that my grandmother had sewn by hand, threw away the paintings she had made, burned the letters she kept in a wooden box in her room. I watched everything in silence, smelling the paint mix with the smell of the memory being erased. Each hammer blow, each painted wall, each discarded object was like a stab wound. It was as if he were trying to erase my grandmother from existence, as if she had never mattered. I tried to protest. I tried to say that it was wrong, that he didn't have the right to do this. But my mother just looked at me with that exhaustion that seemed ancient, as if she had given up on everything a long time ago. Let him do what he wants, she said. It's better this way. We need to move forward. Move forward. As if it were that simple. As if we could simply forget someone who had dedicated their entire life to taking care of us. As if memory were something that could be painted over, covered, ignored. But I couldn't move forward. Not while he was destroying everything my grandmother had built. They started selling things. First it was the furniture, the dining table where we ate together every night, the wooden chairs she had inherited from her mother, the old cabinet where she kept the dishes. Then it was the smaller objects, the ceramic vases, the paintings, the embroidered towels. I saw strangers coming in and out of the house, taking pieces of my grandmother's history, as if they were just worthless objects. And with each thing that left, I felt a piece of me go with it. The flower field was the worst. My stepfather said he was going to sell the land to a builder who wanted to make a parking lot. A parking lot. in the place where my grandmother had planted each flower with her own hands, where she spent hours caring for the earth, where I had grown up learning about patience and beauty. He was going to cover everything with concrete. I couldn't sleep anymore. I spent the nights awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house that were no longer the same. The creaking of the boards seemed different. The wind that came through the windows seemed colder. It was as if the house knew it was dying, as if it were crying with me. One night, while everyone was sleeping, I entered the room that had been hers. It was almost empty now. The bed had been taken, the wardrobe sold, the clothes donated, but the old altar was still there, leaning against the wall, covered in dust. It was a simple altar, made of dark wood, where my grandmother placed fresh flowers every week and burned incense for the ancestors. I knelt in front of it, feeling the weight of the silence, and began to search. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I needed to find something that would show me I wasn't going crazy, that my grandmother really had left me that inheritance, that all of this wasn't just a cruel dream. I ran my hands over the wood, feeling each crack, each imperfection, and that's when I felt something different. On the back of the altar, there was a small protrusion, something stuck with adhesive tape. My heart raced. With trembling hands, I ripped off the tape and found a yellowed envelope. I looked around, making sure I was alone. Then, carefully, I opened the envelope and took out a letter. It was my grandmother's handwriting, shaky but firm. The words danced on the page, written with the purple ink she always used. And when I began to read, the tears started to fall. My dear Minji, if you are reading this, it's because I'm no longer here. And it's because things happened exactly as I feared. Your mother has always been weak, not from lack of love, but from excess of fear. She's afraid of being alone, afraid of not being enough, afraid of losing what she has. And that fear makes her manipulable. I tried to protect her from this all my life, but I failed. When she met that man, I knew immediately that he wasn't what he seemed to be. I saw in his eyes the same greed I saw in so many others. I tried to warn her, but she didn't want to listen. And the more I insisted, the more she pulled away from me. It was painful to see my daughter choose a stranger over me, but I understood there was nothing I could do. She needed to learn on her own. I just hope that when she learns, it won't be too late. What I leave you is not just wealth. It's not just this house, this field, these savings. What I leave you is the right to continue being who you are, to not bow down, to not let the fear of others transform you into someone you don't recognize. Your mother will try to take everything from you. She will say that I was confused, that I didn't know what I was doing. But I knew perfectly. And I left everything registered with a lawyer in the city. His name is on the back of this letter. Look for him. He has all the documents you need. I also left something more. Hidden in the garden, under the third stone to the left of the gate, there is a metal box. Inside it are the family jewels. Not just the jade ring, but also my grandmother's pearl necklace, the gold earrings I received at my wedding, and my father's wedding rings. They're yours now. Don't let them sell them. Don't let them steal them. Don't let them erase you, my dear. You are stronger than you imagine. And remember, what is fair always finds us. Sometimes it takes time, but it always arrives. I love you more than words can express. You were the light of my life, the reason I kept fighting, even when everything seemed lost. And wherever I am now, I will be protecting you. Always. With all my love. Your grandmother. I held the letter against my chest and finally cried. I cried everything I hadn't been able to cry at the funeral. I cried for the loss, for the betrayal, for the loneliness. But I also cried with relief. Because my grandmother had thought of everything. She knew what was going to happen. And she had left a path for me. In that instant, everything I was collapsed and rebuilt itself, stronger, more determined. Little did I know that discovery would be just the beginning. I waited until dawn. When the sun began to rise, I went out to the garden. The grass was wet with dew, and the air had that freshness of early morning. I walked to the gate, counted 3 stones to the left, and began to dig with my hands. The earth was hard, but I continued. And then, I felt something solid. A metal box, rusted by time, but still intact. I opened the box right there, sitting on the muddy ground. Inside, wrapped in silk fabric, were the jewels, the pearl necklace, with each pearl perfectly round and shiny, the gold earrings, delicate and antique, the wedding rings, with inscriptions in Korean that I could barely read, and on top of everything, the jade ring, the one my grandmother wore every day, the one that carried the history of 3 generations of strong women. I put the ring on my finger. It fit perfectly, and in that moment, I felt as if my grandmother were with me, as if she were holding my hand, telling me that everything would be okay. I hid the box in a safe place and went back inside the house. My mother was in the kitchen, preparing coffee. She looked at me with that tired expression that had become permanent. "Where were you?" she asked, without much interest. "In the garden." She didn't ask anything else, and I didn't say. The next day, I looked for the lawyer. His office was small, on a quiet street in downtown Daegu, with a discreet sign on the door. I entered with my grandmother's letter in my hands, my heart beating fast. The receptionist made me wait a few minutes before taking me to his office. He was an older man, with round glasses and a serious expression, but his eyes had a kindness that made me relax a bit. When I mentioned my grandmother's name, he immediately nodded. "I was waiting for you," he said, opening a drawer and taking out a thick folder. "Your grandmother came here 3 months before she died. She said she needed to make sure everything was registered the right way, that there would be no loopholes. She seemed worried." "About my mother?" He hesitated, but then nodded. "She said your mother had married a man she didn't trust, that he was manipulative, and that she feared your mother would be influenced to contest the will." My stomach churned. My grandmother knew. She always knew. The lawyer opened the folder and showed me the documents. They were all there. The will registered at the notary, with the signature of 2 witnesses I didn't know. Medical reports proving that my grandmother was in full mental capacity when she wrote it, and even audio recordings where she declared her last wishes with a firm and clear voice. There was no way to contest it. It was irrefutable. "Your stepfather has no right to anything," the lawyer said firmly. "And if he tries to take possession of something that belongs to you, we can sue him for misappropriation. Your grandmother made sure you were protected." "And my mother?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Can she contest it?" "She can try, but she won't succeed. Your grandmother left her a symbolic amount, enough not to constitute complete disinheritance. Technically, she was included in the will. She just didn't receive the majority of the inheritance." I left that office with the folder under my arm and a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't exactly victory. It was something more complex. It was the certainty that my grandmother had loved me enough to protect me even after she was dead, and the pain of knowing that my mother had betrayed me anyway. When I returned to the house, my stepfather was in the living room, drinking beer and watching television as if that place were his. My mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner in silence. I took a deep breath, walked in, and put the folder on the table. "We need to talk," I said, with a firmness I didn't even know I had. My stepfather looked at me with his usual arrogance. "About what?" "About the fact that none of this is yours, and never was." His smile disappeared. My mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, with a panicked expression on her face. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that Grandma left everything registered, with a lawyer, with witnesses, with medical reports. There's no way to contest it, and if you don't return everything that's mine, I'm going to sue you. I have all the documents here." I opened the folder and spread the papers on the table. The silence that followed was heavy, dense, suffocating. My stepfather turned red, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. My mother started crying, but they were empty tears, without regret. They were tears of someone who realized they had lost. "You have until tomorrow to leave here," I said, with a calm I didn't even know where it came from. "After that, I'm calling the police, and I'm going to make sure that everything you sold, every object you destroyed, is charged in court." My stepfather got up from his chair, his face twisted with rage. "You're going to regret this, girl." "No," I replied, looking directly into his eyes. "The one who's going to regret it is you, for trying to steal from me what was never yours." And it was that night that everything would change, in a way that nobody expected. But not everything goes as planned, because sometimes life has a cruel way of turning everything upside down. That same night, my mother had an accident. She was coming back from the market, carrying heavy bags, when a car hit her on the crosswalk. "The driver was drunk," they said later. "He didn't see her crossing, and he fled, leaving her bleeding on the cold asphalt. I was at home when I received the call. It was a female voice, professional and distant. "Are you a relative of Kim Soo-min?" My whole body froze. "Yes, I'm her daughter. She had an accident. She was taken to Daegu General Hospital. You need to come immediately." For a moment, everything that had happened in the last few days seemed insignificant. The anger, the betrayal, the inheritance, none of it mattered anymore, because deep down, she was still my mother. And the idea of losing her, even after everything, destroyed me in a way I didn't expect. I ran to the hospital. The streets were dark, wet from a recent rain, and the air had that smell of wet asphalt mixed with smoke. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. People passed by me, blurred faces, distant voices. Everything seemed unreal, as if I were in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. When I arrived at the hospital, my stepfather was already there, sitting in the waiting room with his head in his hands. When he saw me, he said nothing. He just looked away. I don't know if it was shame or indifference. Maybe both. A doctor appeared, with that neutral expression they learned to use to give bad news. She suffered severe head trauma. She had multiple fractures. We need to induce a coma to protect the brain. The next few hours will be critical. Will she survive? I asked, my voice breaking. It's too early to say. We'll do everything we can. And then he left, leaving me there, in the cold hallway lit by fluorescent lights that hurt my eyes. I sat in a hard plastic chair and waited. I didn't know for how long. Time stopped making sense. My stepfather stayed for a few hours, but then he left. He said he needed to take care of things at home. But I knew the truth. He was running away, because without my mother conscious to manipulate, he was just a coward, an empty man who only knew how to take advantage of others. I stayed, alone, night after night, day after day. The doctors let me in from time to time, just to see her. And every time I entered that room, my heart broke a little more. She was connected to tubes and machines that beeped in a constant cold rhythm. Her face was pale, swollen from the medications. There were purple bruises around her eyes, and her head was bandaged. She looked so fragile, so small in that hospital bed, so different from the strong woman I wanted her to be. I held her hand and whispered things I didn't know if she could hear. I asked her to come back. I said we still had things to resolve, things to talk about, that I didn't want our last conversation to be that discussion full of hurt and silence, that, despite everything, I still loved her, and that maybe, just maybe, we could start over. But she didn't respond. She just stayed there, trapped somewhere between life and what comes after. The days dragged on like centuries. I slept in uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room, ate sandwiches from vending machines that tasted like cardboard, drank cold coffee from plastic cups. I stopped going home. I stopped caring about anything that wasn't her. A nurse, an older woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, started talking to me. She brought hot tea when her shift ended and sat next to me for a few minutes. "You need to rest," she said. "Your mother won't want to see you like this when she wakes up." "What if she doesn't wake up?" I asked one night, with eyes swollen from crying so much. "She will," the nurse replied, with a conviction I couldn't feel. Mothers always come back to their children. Always. I wanted to believe her, but with each passing day, hope diminished a little more. Sometimes, in the silence of the early morning, I found myself talking to my grandmother. I asked her what I should do. I asked for advice. I begged her to give me a sign that everything would be okay. And sometimes I swore I could feel her presence, a gentle warmth that passed through me, a light smell of incense that came from nowhere, a feeling of peace that didn't make sense to exist there. And in the middle of all this, I wondered, will she remember me when she wakes up? Or will the first name that comes out of her mouth be his? I was afraid of the answer. One night, while I was sitting next to her bed, a young doctor entered the room. She checked the machines, wrote something on a clipboard, and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Are you the daughter?" "Yes. I need to tell you something. Her vital signs are improving. Slowly, but they are. This is a good sign. It means the body is responding. In the next few weeks, we're going to start reducing the sedation, to see if she can come back on her own." My heart jumped. She's going to wake up? I can't promise. But there's hope. Hope. It was all I had now. The weeks dragged on, and with each day I saw small changes. A movement of the fingers, a contraction of the facial muscles, the breathing becoming more regular. They were small signs, almost imperceptible, but they were signs. And then, on a rainy autumn afternoon, it happened. After 4 weeks, the doctors began to reduce the sedation. They said it was time to see if she could come back on her own. I was there when she started to move. First, it was just her fingers, an almost imperceptible movement. Then her breathing changed, became deeper, more natural, and then, slowly, as if she were fighting against an invisible weight, she opened her eyes. She was confused. She looked around without understanding where she was, trying to focus on something. Her eyes moved quickly, searching for something familiar amid the strange. I approached, holding her hand, feeling the tears run down my face before I could even speak. "Mom," I whispered. "I'm here." She slowly turned her head in my direction, as if each movement required immense effort. And then, with a weak, hoarse, almost inaudible voice, she said the name I most needed to hear. "Minji, my name." She had said my name. Not his, not anyone else's. Mine. I collapsed. I cried like I had never cried before, holding her hand as if it were the only real thing in the world. And she cried too, with silent tears that ran from the corners of her eyes and wet the white hospital pillow. "Forgive me," she whispered with difficulty. Each word seemed to hurt, seemed to pull something from inside her. "Forgive me, Minji. I was weak. I let him manipulate me. I was so afraid of losing everything, that I ended up losing you, and your grandmother, and myself. I wanted to say it was okay. I wanted to say I forgave her completely, that everything would go back to how it was before. But I couldn't, because some wounds don't heal that fast. Some betrayals leave marks that take time to fade, and honesty, in that moment, seemed more important than comfort. "I know," was all I could say. "I know, Mom. But I was there, and that, in that moment, was enough." Her recovery was slow, much slower than anyone expected. It took weeks until she could sit in bed without help, months until she could walk again, first with a walker, then with a cane, and finally, alone. But even when her body recovered, her mind still carried the scars. She had changed. The woman who woke from that coma wasn't the same one who had entered it. There was something different in her eyes, a deep sadness, but also a clarity that didn't exist before, as if almost dying had forced her to see things that had always been there, but that she refused to see. During all that time, we talked, really talked. For the first time in years, my mother heard me, saw me, and began to understand how much she had lost trying to please someone who never deserved anything from her. She told me things I didn't know, how she had met my stepfather at a moment of deep loneliness, after years of working nonstop, alone, taking care of everything. How he had been kind at first, attentive, saying all the things she needed to hear. How gradually, he had begun to control every aspect of her life, where she went, who she talked to, how much money she spent. How he had planted in her head the idea that she was weak, that she couldn't survive without him, that he was the only person who truly cared. "He made me believe I was nothing without him," she said one afternoon while we were sitting in the small hospital garden. The sun was warm and there were birds singing in the trees, that I didn't deserve anything, that I was lucky he had stayed with me, and I believed it, because I was so tired of fighting alone that anything seemed better than loneliness. "And Grandma?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why did you distance yourself from her?" My mother closed her eyes, and a tear ran down her face, because she saw through him, and I didn't want to accept that I had made a wrong choice. It was easier to blame her for being difficult, for not accepting my marriage, than to admit I was with a man who was destroying me little by little. "She tried to protect you. I know, and I pushed her away for it. It will haunt me for the rest of my life." We stayed in silence for a while. The wind swayed the tree leaves, creating dancing shadows on the ground. And in that silence, I felt something begin to heal. Not completely, maybe never completely, but a little. "And the inheritance?" she finally asked. "Did you get it?" "I did. Grandma left everything protected. He has no right to anything." She nodded, with an expression that mixed relief and regret. "She was smarter than I imagined. She always was. She loved you, Mom, even when you pulled away, even when you chose him. She never stopped loving you." My mother broke down in tears, and I held her, letting her cry everything she had held in for so long. When she finally was discharged, I made a decision. I couldn't stay in Daegu anymore. Every corner of that city carried too many memories, some good, others that hurt just to remember. My grandmother's house, even though it was mine now, no longer felt like a home. It felt like a mausoleum of everything we had lost. With the money from selling the house and the savings my grandmother had left, I decided to start over. I searched for weeks until I found the right place. A small commercial space in Incheon, near the sea. It was a simple place, with large windows that let in the sunlight and the sound of the waves in the distance. It had a view of the harbor, where fishing boats returned every morning loaded with fresh fish, and the air always smelled of salt and freedom. I transformed the space into a cafe. Not just any cafe, but a place that felt like a hug. I painted the walls a soft shade of beige, put in recovered wooden tables, comfortable chairs where people could stay for hours. I hung light curtains that swayed with the sea breeze, and I put plants in every corner, because my grandmother always said that plants bring life to any space. On the counter, I placed my grandmother's jade ring in a small glass box. Every day when I open the cafe, I look at it and remember her words. What is fair will find you. And she was right. It took time. It was painful, but it found me. I called the cafe Grandma's Mornings. It was a tribute to her, to those mornings in Daegu where she woke up early and prepared breakfast before the sun fully rose, where the smell of cooked rice and burning firewood filled the house, where she sang that old song she never finished. The cafe became popular quickly, not because of the food, although I served the best sweet rice cakes in the region, using my grandmother's secret recipe, but because of the atmosphere. People came in tired with the weight of the day on their shoulders, and left smiling. Maybe because the aroma of coffee mixed the past with hope. Maybe because in that small and welcoming space, they felt they could be themselves, without judgments, without demands. My mother came with me, not because I forced her, but because she wanted to. She said she needed to start over, that she wanted to be the woman she had forgotten to be. And gradually, over time, we began to rebuild something. It wasn't the same as before. It never would be. But it was real. It was honest. She helped at the cafe. She took care of the plants, cleaned the tables, talked to the customers, and gradually, I saw her start to smile again. A genuine smile. Not that forced one she used when she was with my stepfather. A smile that came from within, that lit up her face and made her eyes shine. One morning, a few months after we opened, she was watering the plants near the window when she stopped and stood looking at the sea. I was behind the counter, preparing a latte for a customer, when I heard her start to sing. It was soft, almost a whisper, but I recognized it immediately. It was my grandmother's song, the one she never finished singing, the song about the woman who waited for her husband to return from war. I stopped what I was doing and just listened. And when she reached the last verse, the verse my grandmother never sang, I realized I was crying because my mother had found the end of the song, and with it perhaps a bit of peace. My stepfather, he never came back. He never called. It was as if he had simply disappeared from our lives. I heard months later, from an acquaintance in Daegu, that he had tried to sue anyway, that he had hired a cheap lawyer and tried to claim he had a right to the inheritance because he had taken care of my grandmother. But there was no legal basis. None. And the judge dismissed the case in less than a week. I also heard that he had lost everything he had in gambling and drinking, that he was living in a tiny apartment on the outskirts of the city, working at a gas station. Part of me felt sorry, a small part, hidden deep down, but most of me felt relief, because he was no longer part of my story. He had no more power over me, and what he had tried to steal had returned to where it should have always stayed, and the inheritance my grandmother left me. I realized over time that it wasn't the money, it wasn't the house, or the flower field, or the jewels hidden in the garden. It was something much bigger. It was the strength to fight for what is mine. It was the courage not to give up, even when everything seemed lost. It was the certainty that, no matter what happens, I will always have myself, and that, in the end, is all that really matters. Today, when I look around the cafe, I see the faces of people who have become friends. I see the elderly lady who comes every morning to drink jasmine tea and read the newspaper at the table by the window. I see the college student who spends hours studying here because he says the environment helps him concentrate. I see the young mother who comes with the baby in her arms, seeking a few minutes of peace while drinking a cappuccino. I see stories. I see life. Sometimes, when the cafe is empty and only the sound of the sea comes through the window, I close my eyes and feel her presence. I smell cooked rice and burning firewood. I hear her voice singing that old song, and I know that wherever she is, she's proud of me, because I didn't bow down. I didn't let them erase me. And I found a way to transform pain into something beautiful. My mother is here with me now. She's not perfect, She still carries the marks of what she lived, of what she chose, of what she lost. But she's trying, and somehow, that's more than I expected. Sometimes, at night, when we close the cafe and sit together on the porch looking at the stars, she holds my hand and just stays silent. And in that silence, there's more love than in all the words we could say. I learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing not to let the past define who you are. It means understanding that people are flawed, that they make mistakes, that sometimes they choose the wrong path, and that despite that, they still deserve a chance to start over. Not for them, but for us. Because carrying anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I also learned that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's being present. It's holding someone's hand when the world crumbles. And that sometimes, the people who love us most are those who are already gone. Because true love transcends physical presence. It stays, in memories, in lessons, in the strength they give us to continue. If this story touched you, leave a heart in the comments and share it with someone who needs to hear this, because there are many people out there thinking they need the approval of others to feel sufficient. But the truth is that the only approval that matters is our own. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to carry the weight of other people's wrong choices. You just need to be you. And that, my love, is already more than enough. In Korea, I learned that even the coldest winter holds a spring. And mine began the day my mother opened her eyes and said my name. The day I found my grandmother's letter hidden behind the altar. The day I decided I wouldn't let anyone erase me. The day I understood that the greatest proof of love is when you decide to love yourself enough not to accept less than you deserve. And today, while I serve coffee to strangers who become friends, while I hear stories of pain and overcoming, while I watch the sun set over the Sea of Incheon, I know I've found my place. It's not perfect. There are difficult days. There are moments when the longing for my grandmother squeezes my chest and the tears come without warning. There are nights when I wonder if I made the right choices. But it's mine, and that's all I ever needed. Thank you for staying with me until here. You're part of this journey, and I hope that, somehow, this story has reminded you that you're also stronger than you imagine, that your wounds don't define you, that you're not what they did to you, but what you chose to become after. And that, no matter how many times you fall, you'll always have the strength to get up, because that strength is already inside you. It always was. It was just waiting for the right moment to appear. Until next time. And remember, what is fair always finds us. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes the path is painful and full of obstacles. But it always arrives. And when it arrives, you'll know it was worth the wait.